In the year 21X, Lord Boxman opened a store to arm his robot horde. But the heroes of Lakewood Plaza
are ready to fight! KO Renegade are in battle mode. Once you keep the bag, I silly all explode. Power up and fight, let's watch an episode of Lakewood
Podcast
Turbo!
We're gonna handle it right now because it's cool to have a job. This week's episode of Lakewood Podcast Turbo. I'm your host Wyatt, and no, I'm gonna kick their minds. Who is here with me today, as always?
The local pest, Buster Corp, or True Buster, or whatever you want to call me, Buster. Just that's the name I go by.
And who is our very special guest appearing on the show for the first time?
Best podcast ever, Toby Jones.
Oh, Toby, okay, I don't want to scare the people listening to this, but you may or may not have some connection to the show that we're doing this podcast on.
Yes.
Would you like to maybe tell everybody what your involvement is?
Yes.
If they do not know.
I'm sorry to say that I was, for these episodes, I was a supervising producer on the show, and then I went on to be an executive producer on the show. It's the same job. It just the title changed as I did it for longer. I ran the show with Ian. I was number 2 with Ian, and we developed the show after the pilot into the show you're watching now, and the show it was for all of its episodes.
Yeah. Oh man.
Very epic.
It's cool.
Radically
to,
epic.
Talk to you again. For me, it's been. I had a previous podcast. We've talked on that a couple times. Go check that out. It's called Explode When Defeated or Discuss on Monsters, whichever one you can find on your podcatcher there. Good stuff. But this one is actually about cartoons, and it's about a very specific one. So I can now pick your brain about some things. I do want to know. Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming on.
Always happy to talk KO. Always happy to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. I do want to know, I did notice, supervising producer, that's an interesting credit as opposed to EP. Mm-hmm. What, you said that there's functionally no difference, but what did the job entail, for these episodes and just everything in general that you were in that position with?
I mean, yeah, basically, early on in development, pretty much right after the pilot, Ian asked me to join up and help him out with developing it into the series. And so basically him and I teamed up on the show from there. And once the show got running, him and I basically split and shared duties running the show. And so every aspect of the production, from writing to boarding to design to music, all the way to post-production, him and I were both involved with overseeing and molding it into this thing that it is. And so there's always this kind of thing where they call it the strong number 2 or whatever. So it's it's his show and it's his vision, and I'm helping realize that, and also sharing duties. Sometimes we would be in the same room doing a meeting or giving approvals on something, or sometimes we would split off and do different things to divide and conquer. But basically him and I were running the show together for its entire run.
So when you were doing, when you were in this position and you were doing all this stuff, I know the board artists, they usually write the episodes, essentially. It is a board-driven show, so they're kind of in charge of the script. But who was in charge of doing the outlines that they went off of? Was that you, or was that another person on the crew?
The outlines were written by, we had 2 outline writers, Dave Tennant and Aaron Shade. And so we had kind of a little writer's room. It would be usually me and Ian, and then the 2 writers. And then once we promoted Geneva joined the room as well. And so it would be the 4 of us, later the 5 of us, in the room jamming on ideas, basically beating out the story in the room. We have the whole classic whiteboard situation where we'd go beat by beat and figure out what we wanted to do. And then it was the job of Dave Tennant and Aaron Shade to interpret kind of our conversations and our ideas into workable outline outlines, and then those outlines are both what we send to the network to approve it and get approval to tell that story, and then also what we give to the board artists for them to then adapt into their episodes. So in the case of both of these episodes, today, and I'll certainly get into it when we get into them, but both of these ideas kind of came from conversations between me and Ian, and ideas that we kind of talked over that we then brought into the writers' room, and then they adapted into gorgeously beautiful outlines, which then became gorgeously beautiful storyboards, etc.
Yeah, I'm very glad that the episodes, like one of the episodes that we're talking about, are excellent. Though I'm a bit biased, but I do want to say that the artists for them are some of the more like unique artists for the show. Not to like pick favorites or anything. I'm not going to do that, but like Stevie Bourboil and Danny Ducker and Dave Allegri and Haewon Lee, they just have such like out there sort of styles when they're boarding. Yeah. And it like really comes through in the episodes. And
the show is so board driven. It is an especially board driven show. And so in the case of both of these episodes and all the episodes really, any TV show is a collaboration, but like the drawings you're looking at and the jokes you're hearing are often directly the voice of the board artists on any given episode.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, where like people like Mira Antra are like very anatomical, very like proportionate, sort of like anime-esque character designs, and so like. Oh, and things boarded by Parker are normally like very witty and like a joke a minute kind of thing, just in that kind of like wordplay sort of jokes, instead of like Dave Allegri and Haewon Lee, like their episodes are just like completely bonkers looking. They just scream with this like insane personality to them. But to be specific, the episodes that we're talking about today are We've Got Pests and Legends of Mr.Gar. We've Got Pests has the ignominious honor of being my favorite episode of the first season. Maybe one of my favorite episodes of
I'm glad I'm
the
here.
Whole show. Yes. This one is, I love it.
So much. It's great. It's
so
probably
many
one of the
reasons.
most standout episodes this season.
Yeah.
If only for the end, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, the end was like... It was one of those moments where when I was first watching the show, when it was airing, I was like, what the hell is this show that it's able to do this to me? Like, why? Why did that happen? But I do, to bring it back a bit, with, just in case you don't know, Toby, with this, we don't, like, we're not doing it like a cartoon style or anything, or Talking Simpsons style, where we like go beat by beat through the episode. It's more of a general discussion about the episode. So I do want to bring up the idea of the pests.
Yes.
Gnarlio, Peach, and Chillcat. Obviously that's rooted in like the 90s sort of like cool mascots, like cereal mascots or game mascots. If
I could, sorry. Please ask the question.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Gnarlio, being a lizard creature, very reminiscent of Gex, and I know that you are a big fan of Gex.
I mean, I'm a massive Gex fan. I love Gex deeply. And so, we had to have one that was Gex-like, and it had to be the kind of ringleader of all of them. So to talk a little bit about Pests and kind of where it came from, Pests was actually the very, very, very first idea that I came to Ian with when we had our very first meeting about the show. Ooh. Like, he came to me and he's like, "Hey, let's talk about developing the show." And we had a lunch at a diner, and I had like a few different ideas. And the very first one was, wouldn't it be funny if, because we're in this video game world, if the plaza gets overrun by an infestation of 90s platformer mascots. And then it ended up being one of the first two outlines we ever wrote, actually. Pests and Do You Have Any More in the Back, I think, were the two first outlines we wrote with Dave Tennant before Aaron joined the team. Oh, man. And
those are really good episodes.
I think I really like that one. And they both got approved, but then the network was kind of like, "Hey, these are fine, but let's not do them right away. Let's like wait until a little bit later in the show, because both of these episodes are kind of like deconstructions. Sorry, both Back and Pests are like deconstructions of these characters, and so it's like, well, let's construct them first before we start getting into them in this way for both Rad and Enid.
So I have a question. I remember in previous podcasts you've mentioned that there was a period of time between the pilot and between the show coming out that you made like test episodes. Were these the episodes?
No.
Or what? Okay.
So we didn't do this. This idea existed, but we decided not to pick it as one of those test episodes. So we did these 2 storyboards, which were full 11-minute storyboards that Ian and I personally boarded, and they were totally different concepts. And in fact, they were both really, really bad episode ideas to do early, because one of them was about the idea is that Rad and KO have a mutiny against Enid because she's the assistant manager. And so that's the premise of one of them, and the other one was about an evil imposter of Mr.Gar taking his place.
Imposter?
Yeah, and they were both really, 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 really funny and great. But fundamentally, there's an issue with both concepts, which is that they're both like subversions on things that exist in the show, where it's like, we all know what the situation's like for Rad, Enid, and KO. So what if Rad and KO had a mutiny? It's like, well, you don't know, because it's like the first storyboard, so you don't know. And then same thing with Mr.Gar. It's like, we all know Mr.Gar is this great boss and hero, but what if he started acting kind of evil? It's like, well, you don't know him yet, so it doesn't really work.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually,
I would have loved to see the Mr.Gar episode, because that just sounds super fun. Just seeing like an evil take on this magnificent hero.
I mean, it was really funny and really good. It's just that as I've kind of said it on other shows and stuff, the tone of those boards was extremely different. Well, not extremely different, but quite different from the show. Extremely gag-driven, even more so than the current show. Much more wacky and cartoony. A little bit less character-driven, a little bit less emotional. And so, the network was kind of like, these are funny or whatever, but like the show needs to be like a little bit deeper and a little bit more, engaging for us to pick it up. So
humanize these people.
Yeah, although
I feel like you've struck a really good balance, though. Like the final product in season 1, like it's kind of both like the loosest season and the most chill, because like the later, like season 2 especially, like there are some really out there, really wacky, very, very funny episode concepts. And
I mean, certainly watching the show again, watching these 2 episodes again, I was like actually kind of shocked by how loose the show is, because it's like the show is known kind of for being loose, and that is by design, but like we do figure out the right balance as the show goes on. Even like pretty soon after these episodes, I feel like we're starting to hit kind of a stride with both the tone of the show and the feel of the show and the look of the show. And I think all those things kind of only improve as the show goes on. Which, it's really kind of tragic that shows get canceled so early nowadays. When I mention, like, hey, OK KO really starts to hit its stride, like episode 20, 30, 40. It's really starting to hit its stride. A lot of shows don't even get to go to there and find their stride in the first place. So it's kind of a bummer to think about.
That definitely has me depressed. A lot of that, like, not to get too down in the dumps here, but there is kind of like a sort of wariness I have about the future of like cartoons, like not necessarily animation or whatever, because it's different across the world, but like these American cartoons, that are of this type. Like, there was a time not too long ago, like 2021, where Netflix was releasing amazing masterpieces, like left and right, like City of Ghosts and like Centaur World and things like that. And then like last year was just so depressing with how much shit went wrong on that end. And it's just like, and I just, as somebody who's done a lot of cartoon reviews, it becomes more and more obvious that every single time, like, the second season is the real deal. Like, that's when a show actually becomes 100% like, this is what the show is.
Yeah, in the case of KO, I feel like that was 1B, which would have been season 2, and then our season 2 is like when we start expanding and twisting and doing stuff. So
because season 1's huge.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
so like
absurd amount of episodes.
Yeah,
in season
1A is like season 1, and then So, but I think what you're talking about is certainly true, and obviously, I don't want to get into this too much, but I would say I feel similarly dark about the not about the future, but about the present. I think that the thing you're describing as the future is the present, and I think that the future will get. I do think in the future things will start to improve again.
I do have I have hope. I have optimism that things will get better. There's like a lot of great talented people working still, and they're gonna just keep on trying to make stuff happen.
Yeah, and of course, because making a cartoon takes so long, the present means, in 2024, 2025, you won't have as many cool cartoons to watch, probably. Exactly. But then, after that, I think things, we'll there'll be more things in production. I definitely think that. I know that.
Yeah. And on that note, like I talked about it a bit before we were recording, but, Peach, voiced by Kath Soucie, which of course I just associate with the 90s because of like, Phil and Lil and just like a lot of characters. Like, she was Sally Acorn, right? In Sonic?
Yeah.
That was, yeah. Just got to make sure that I remember that. But like, that just, I was like, Trick Moon was on my mind because on April Fool's, there was the OK KO Caps account that just started uploading, pictures and clips from that pilot, and that just makes me like, oh man, I wish that got picked up so badly.
I certainly do too.
Yeah, I mean,
we should live in a world where every single KO board artist who wanted to was able to move on to their own show afterward.
Yeah.
But sadly, due to all of the merger and corporate nonsense, that has been at least temporarily prevented from happening. But hopefully everybody has their day if they want it.
Yeah, and then we'll 2026 we'll get Mau Mau season 2.
Oh boy.
Oh man, this is just hurting me.
But to go back, to something, to go back to the episode, be a little bit more positive. Gnarlio being Robbie Wrist, who is Mikey in the 90s TMNT movies.
I believe that was I believe that was Parker's pitch. I believe that we were just I think we were just like on Slack being like, who should we bring in for all these folks? And I think Parker might have suggested Robbie Wrist, and I forget who suggested awesome. Kath Soucie, but they were. But
that just fit perfectly. Like she just has such a she's still a great voice actress, but like I just think of the 90s when I hear like in the same way as with Jim Cummings like as Boxman and everything. Like every time I hear him, it's like a voice out of time. The version of that, like the modern version of that, I guess, is like still hearing Tom Kenny and stuff. Like it's not like he's so old and decrepit or anything, but it's just that like he's has such a long tail behind him, starting with Rocco in the 90s and then like still continuing today, like hearing him in like Kiff and things like that, I'm like, oh my god, Tom Kenny.
And it's like these people, like the reason why they hang around so much is just because they're like so incredibly good at their jobs and like so pleasurable to work with. Like I remember when Kath came in, it was just one day for that small role, but it was just like immediately she nailed it, and I was just like, oh, immediately why these people get so much work and why they're so revered and why they have been so many legendary characters. And that's true. That's true of anybody who you bring in who has that kind of reputation.
Nice.
And of course, Chill Cat is Kari Wahlgren, who is a frequent voice on the show, but still excellent. I love her. And
Kari is one of the greatest actors in the world. And we brought in Kari for the first time on the mobile game, the Lakewood Plaza Turbo mobile game, because that was like there are only a few voiced characters in that, but I remember the conversation being like, oh, Shannon has a few lines, who do you want to get? And immediately coming to Kari because of my love of the Fooly Cooly dub.
Oh yeah. Oh man, yeah, it all comes together, But yeah, these characters, such beautifully stupid designs, such vapid characters. Just like I just love that so much about them. It's just there's absolutely no humanity behind them. There's no deeper thing, but that's like what's funny about the episode. And that's what's like amazing about the ending and everything and like hilarious about the ending. is that that it's like this weird like multi-minute long like emotional takedown of these characters that like never really looked inward. They were always just projecting this like coolness outward.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say that like the whole episode kind of being focused around how rad like he also is very superficially cool, you know, so he like wants to connect with these people on that wavelength, but they're just savvy enough to know that he's fake, whereas they can realize that Enid is the real deal, you know. And that's like it's a fun dynamic, just because like to this point Rad has been so much of the like that kind of, I mean, his name is Rad,
he's very
and he's
rad.
like, yes, he is a very Poochie-esque character in that way, and then like him
I
getting,
never
like,
thought of it that way, but
I mean,
yeah,
it's
surprisingly
true.
fits.
So many of the, I
Yeah.
mean, the show is very Poochie forward. There are a lot of Poochie-esque characters. You know, it's a world of Poochies in a way.
and then like the fact that he gets owned by a bunch of like even more powerful Poochies is just like a delight. But yeah,
But yeah, to speak
What are you
to
gonna
that, you know, so yeah, there was a version of the episode was very different originally. We had a completely different concept. The first one that got approved, and Enid had a completely different emotional arc. It was all about her not caring about things, trying to keep up her front of not caring. And the premise was that she was working the front counter, and the pests come in and start making a big hubbub, and she and KO and Rad are like, isn't this a problem? Like, aren't they like ruining the store? But she's like, I don't care. Like, that's what I do. I don't care. And it was about her struggle with that. And then, you know, that set, we got that approved, and it sat on the shelf for a while we conceived the first bunch of episodes. And then we wrote the episode titled You Have to Care, which is about that aspect of Enid's personality and her kind of, you know, aloofness and all that stuff. And once we finished that, it was like, wait a second, this is the same arc twice if we go back, if we do Pests. So, I mean, at the 11th hour, I want to say even just a couple days before we handed out Pests to the board artists, we rewrote almost the entire outline to be a whole different kind of version of the story that wasn't going to step on what we did in You Have to Care. And the main thing that remained between them was that ending. And that was something that I remember. I think I was just like out walking my dog, and I came up with that idea that there'd be this like extended montage of the rest of their lives that would be super like melancholy and heartfelt. And that was something I was really excited about. And so that was the thing that, like, when we were reconceiving it, it's like, how can we do a story with the same basic elements that lands in that same spot? And that's so, I don't even remember, honestly, I don't even know if there was such a tight deadline on like reconceiving that story. I don't even know if we submitted the V2 of Pests to the network for approval. I think we might have even just been like, well, they approved the idea of a bunch of pests and stuff, so let's just go ahead and do it and see what happens. I mean, we might have even just done that. But you know, kudos to the writing team on, you know, to Dave and Aaron for very quickly coming together to like conceive this episode. And you know, there's a lot to be said about how much we planned out season 1 and the way that those episodes play out in the order that they do on purpose. And that's a perfect example. You know, okay, this is like the second big Enid episode, and then the third one is You Have to Care. So we want to make sure that all these episodes are kind of building on each other properly. Yeah,
season 1 definitely feels very character, like that's kind of like the arcs that it goes through is just character arcs, as opposed to having a story arc or anything. I mean, it does kind of have that like subtly throughout it. You know, we get introduced to Venomous early on, and then eventually like Venomous like has the chip and everything later in the season, and then that leads into the finale. But mostly the development and continuity comes from like character arcs, which there's an argument to be made with certain sections of the cartoon fandom about story-driven cartoons and, you know, non-story, you know, like the comedy cartoons. You know, like that there's like an inherent difference between like these lore shows, quotes, stuff like Steven Universe, stuff like The Owl House, and then there's a difference between that and stuff like Big City Greens,
Right.
or stuff like Harvey Beaks or whatever. And like that OK KO, like it sits in the middle. Whereas I don't necessarily think, I think the distinctions are just kind of silly in general, because from
Good show is good
what
show.
Well, yeah, but what I've observed between the things is that there's not that much difference, but structurally, between the two. Like, obviously, some things are going to be way more serialized than others. Things like miniseries, Infinity Train. Like, each book is kind of like, they still have time to have like standalone episodes. And in fact, one of my favorite episodes of the whole show is the quartz car in book 1. But I think it's like an underrated aspect of the more like down to earth, like non-lore shows, those kind of things, that like they still reward you for paying attention.
Oh yeah, of course.
And like being invested in the show and the characters and everything, because they're still, the people creating it are still writing it in a linear order. And they're still like, okay, we are developing these characters. The past actions do matter. Now, that isn't necessarily true for every show, but that has become like more true for more shows that people just like throw into the category of like, oh, this isn't a lore show or whatever. Like, I think when that kind of hit me the hardest, like I've been thinking it for years, but like it really hit me with The Ghost of Molly McGee on Disney, where there was a lot of people saying like, oh, unlike Amphibia and The Owl House, this does not have a story. I'm like, it definitely has a story. Like every episode like leads right into the next episode in some way. Like, and it's building, like it has a premise and it has like build up and a finale with like a conclusion, for the first season. I don't know how you could not think that that's a story unless your definition of story requires like dense lore, world building, and like,
well, also you're talking
action and everything like that.
And also, if your definition of a story requires that you don't get some sort of satisfying conclusion in 11 minutes, it's like you can tell a satisfying story in 11 or 22 minutes that feeds into a larger story. And I think that there are strangely maybe some people who are like, wait a second, that story had a satisfying ending. That means it isn't part of a bigger story. It's like, no.
Yes.
Both of these things can be true at the same time. And look, a lot of these shows are really good at that. Shows like Steven are really, really good at doing a thing where you get an 11-minute piece that has its own beginning, middle, and end, and is very satisfying, while also providing you with a bigger piece of lore puzzle, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think, like I've talked about it many times on this podcast already. Future amazing season of television, and there's some like, that's a very quote unquote episodic series, because you don't realize that everything is falling into place towards this one direction until near the end. Like obviously the astute viewer can like start to be like, uh-oh, Steven's going down a bad path, and then start to put the pieces together and like speculate what will happen in this domino effect.
Yeah.
But just like each episode on their own is like a standalone thing, but it ends up contributing to this greater whole. And you like, I think the only time you really get an ending that like ends abruptly and then leads into the next is with Here to Help. Is that the name of the episode, where like it ends with him transforming? Spoilers.
Right. Sometimes you do a cliffhanger. Sometimes you do.
Yes.
And
that's
fine.
that's like, that's, yeah, exactly. Like Steven can go between both.
Yeah.
Like even in its episodes where it reveals new characters or new lore or whatever, it can have like a solid ending, that still teases that there's going to be more, stay tuned, that kind of thing, while also having like this harrowing sort of cliffhangers where it's like, oh God, what's going to happen next?
So
I feel like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like season 1 of OK KO is like, has the least amount of story in that sense, in that like there's not the hard episode to episode continuity, but there's like a soft episode to episode continuity, and there's like really great character continuity throughout, and like the more that we learn about these characters and we're revealing their inner lives, and like issues that they may have that they're like keeping bottled up and everything. Like you mentioned the Enid, you know, like she's already like we've had multiple episodes that are about her and her like her emotional repression, or her trying to like put on this like version of herself that maybe not be an authentic version of herself, or not 100% authentic.
Yeah, and then this is part of that. You know, it's all building this thing where we're building out this character, and then when you get to, you know, you have to care, then it's like, okay, now that we've shown you several episodes of this character and what makes them tick, now we can kind of show you, hey, how did they, you know, here's one example of like how they might have ended up this way, you know, and how that affects them right now. And if we had just started with, you know, you have to care, the episode still would have been good, but, you know, wouldn't have had the same impact, you know.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I to talk a little bit about. Well, okay. Actually, I do want to ask a question about the three characters, Gnarlio, Peach, and Chillcat. So we mentioned before that Gnarlio is partially based on Gex,
inspired
you know,
by, you could say, you know,
avenue. Were there any specific inspirations for like Peach and Chillcat? Yeah, because I can think of like Cool Spot for Peach.
Yeah,
you know, it's like a thing with sunglasses on. You know, but like,
yeah. In the case of the other two, I genuinely don't have a strong memory. But the only thing that I'll note is that, you know, I was looking at some of the old outlines, and the characters, some of them had different names. You know, Gnarlio was always Gnarlio, but I think that the other two maybe had some different names, and so I just have to assume that the specifics of Peach and Chillcat, and I'm sure we went back and forth about it a couple times, but I have to assume that a lot of that was conceived by Danny and Stevie. You know, because the show gives so much leeway to the board artists, you know, it's a good thing and a bad thing that, for example, you get handed an outline and you don't have a character design right in front of you to work from, and so you work on, okay, what do I want to draw for the next month? You know, what do I want this to look like? And so, you know, I can't recall the specifics on Peach and Chillcat, but they certainly are good at evoking the thing that we're trying to evoke. And I love that two of them are animals and one of them is a talking pineapple.
Yeah. That definitely, like, cereal mascot, like that kind of thing. Like, that's what it instilled in me. Yeah, and then, like, yeah, I don't know. Just very beautifully stupid characters.
Yeah, and so the thing,
beautifully stupid ending, you know, just all together.
Yeah, one of the key things about those three characters, though, is you know, OK KO, again, a show that appears very, very loose, but we have actually a very strong control over, you know, our tone and what we're doing. And you may have heard legend that we had a list of words that we didn't allow the show to say. Because there was certain vernacular that was going around a lot and continues to go around a lot these days in cartoons and cartoon humor that we wanted to avoid, just to kind of carve out a bit of our own identity and not kind of just do the same things other shows were doing. So we had a very long list that we distributed to the crew of like, we can't say these words. Like, we're not doing these things. And for the purposes of this episode, there was a conversation being like, hey, to do these characters, can we crack open Pandora's box and say the things that we're not supposed to say on the show? And we decided, okay, this one time we can do that. And so a lot of the things those characters say are on the list. You know, hashtag is a key thing. It's so funny because it's like, you know, the reason why hashtag was on the list was because it was going to be dated. And sure enough, you watch it now, man, that feels dated. It's exactly the right, exactly that thing. And, you know, and I joked earlier about best blank ever. That was something that we could not do it. We had basically a rule where we tried to just never even say the word awesome. Any derivative of the word awesome we tried not to say. I'm looking at the list right now. It has like, ooh, shiny. It has like nom nom nom, feels, you know, sorry not sorry is on there, buzzkill, you know.
Oh man,
it has a whole list.
Maybe more shows should do this. I don't know.
Calling something a thing, Blanky McBlank blank is one. The characters say that, you know, we thought you were Cooley McCoolerson or whatever. That was something that Ian is like, I really hated when people do Blanky McBlank. Obviously, Mission Hill was the original and did a great job on that at the time. But I think since then, so I'm looking at this list of like 40 phrases and words where it's just like we got to avoid these if we can. And it's not that we always succeeded, but it's really interesting to watch. And I think thinking about that, watching the episode, like I really feel it. It's like, man, these characters, it really hurts because they're doing all the things that we're not supposed to do on the show.
Yeah, I think of
They're
how many
learning.
times, how many times have characters in cartoons I've watched in the past like 5-6 years said "awesome sauce"? I'm
Like the music of like
Can't think
this,
of any.
of like this is awesome. You know, that kind of like thing of like
Yeah.
I love a part. You know, dance party. You know, all that stuff. Like we just tried really hard to.
calling things epic.
And so it's
I
like
remember like
yeah.
it being a teenager in like the early 2000s and being like, I think that them saying epic is kind of overplayed on TV, and this was like the Bush administration, so like,
And these things they just don't ever fully die, you know, and so
Yeah.
you know.
But yeah, I guess the only thing I have left to say in regards to like the ending and everything, well, first of all, I love that Peach becomes like an author, like becomes a biographer, like an autobiographer, as if people are, and I guess people are lining up to like get books from
It
them.
must be a really, really good book.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's a completely unknown person just making a book. But yeah, that's just like a funny little thing. And then like Chill Cat becoming like a doctor, and then Gnarleo coming home to like beautiful wife and child. It's just so funny.
I remember
But
having
again, it's
yeah, we were having discussions when they appear later in the Christmas episode, being like, "Wait, how much time passed? Is it the adult version or the teen version when we see them later?"
Yeah.
like it's like how does this actually work?
Yeah, and the just like him going and looking at the photo album and then just the thank you and the tear dropping on it. It's so goofy and maudlin, but like it worked on, like, for whatever reason when I first watched this episode in 2017, like it made me misty-eyed. I was like, that was weirdly beautiful.
I love to hear this
Like,
because it's like that.
it's hard.
You know, genuinely, when we did that episode, when we did that ending, you know, one thing I'll say, you know, we had a lot of creative freedom for a lot of the run of the show, you know, to do crazy stuff. I mean, you see it in every episode. And, you know, that concept of this crazy ending was in every version. And the network never said, like, don't do that. I think they always just thought it was good. Now, we always just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And I love, you know, Danny boarded that sequence. And I really was happy with the way that she expressed the idea there and made it so funny and so heartfelt. And the main thing that I started, like, immediately when that episode aired, the thing I was seeing was people being like, oh, this made me cry. Like, this was so sad. Yeah. And we were all just like, whoa! Like, we just thought it was the funniest thing ever. And so, funniest thing ever!
Why. Yeah. But that's why it's so good.
It's true.
Because it is hilarious, but, like, the fact that it catches you off guard, it makes you feel like ridiculous. And that's even funnier, right?
Because they're these specific characters,
Yeah, it's like these characters, and it's such an absurd concept of like, all right, let's cut into the future and do this like long drawn out scene where we just see them like living their lives and they've grown and changed as people, and he has a beautiful family and a house and everything. It's just so over the top. Like, no, it's just committing to the joke so hard, and like you're just in it because of that. You know, it's like so funny. But, like, I don't know. I think that there's somehow a thin line between the extremes of sadness and happiness,
right?
You know? Because, like, a lot of my favorite things are able to, like, hit on that emotion and are able to, like, exploit it in some... You know, my favorite show, Gurren Lagann, is, like, such an absurd action comedic show, but has like some of the most like profound, awesome, like inspirational moments and these like beautiful emotional moments and great character development and things like that throughout it. You know, that's like you can go from like these goofy, you know, very like similar to like FLCL stuff like that, like those scenes, and then like dive right into like a character moment or a line or something like that just like knocks you right on your ass, and you're like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, and I'm very happy that it still works, and it's definitely one of those things where we were still, especially, I mean, again, this is one of our first episode ideas, and we were still finding our voice, and it was the question of like, what is the OK KO difference? What are we going to do in our stories that makes the show different from other shows? Because there are only so many 11-minute every show does certain 11-minute ideas. Every kid's 11-minute show has the zombie episode, it has the Chuck E. Cheese episode, it has all this stuff. And so it's like, okay, and we did the zombie episode, and so the same thing, it's like, what's our difference going to be? And you certainly see that later. And so for this, it's just like, okay, this is like a somewhat normal episode idea of these characters coming in and messing with them, and it's us being like, okay, we know how the show is different with its characters and its visuals and all that stuff. But it's like, what do we do differently with our storytelling? And that was certainly an early example of like, okay, we can push these directions here and catch people off guard, which is always one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. So I think now we should talk about the next episode.
Let's do it.
Episode 16, Legends of Mr.Gar, bordered by Dave Allegri and Haewon Lee. First of all, right off the bat begins with a pilot reference, which I really appreciate, with Daryl. And
smells bad.
It goes farther than that. That whole first part, the kind of cold open of that episode, actually comes from that old storyboard that Ian and I did. Of the one where Mr.Gar is being there's like a imposter Mr.Gar. That one had this exact intro sequence where we're seeing how cool Mr.Gar is, and so we literally just told Dave and Haewon, like, lift that scene, and of course they went in and they updated it, they did some tweaks and they plussed it, but like the action of like all the cool stuff he does and the joke with like the envelope in the mailbox, that was all stuff that Ian and I had originally drawn years previously. So it goes even beyond. It's awesome. A pilot reference inside an old abandoned storyboard inside an episode.
Yeah, I love that. I love when like you Frankenstein old ideas together and it like makes one coherent like thing that nobody even thinks twice about, that's just like, it feels like it was always meant to be, despite the fact that it was some cobbled together thing of like 3 different iterations or 3 different ideas. I think the action sequence is really awesome. It's like one of the more memorable ones with Gar for me in the show, despite it kind of like being like not a action-y episode. It is more of like a backstory, more comedic episode, but like just that, like him dodging the drill and then like leaning back and then knocking Daryl, that's just like such a cool little thing. That's the thing with this show, is that it's like it can actually be cool when it's it's not just as a joke or anything. They're just like sometimes it will just commit to being cool, and every time it does that, it's just you can tell that the people are having fun just making it, and boarding in everything. It's just fucking cool to have that. But there's a couple other possible pilot references. I don't know for sure, but the fact that Enid's hair is so big and floofy in like her flashback, it made me think of like how in the pilot Enid has like a much longer ponytail. Yeah,
Enid's design in her flashback derives from some sketches that Rebecca had done. And I forget at what point in the pipeline those drawings were done. It might have been at the very beginning, or it might have been between the pilot and the series. But that was an example of like, let's take this like really cool sketch that Rebecca did and use it as this piece of Enid's backstory.
So, and then is the character's name Skateboard Kid?
Oh, Skateboard Nerd.
Oh, Skateboard. Okay,
that's an amazing name.
So for what I can remember, dies here and never comes back, except for in the like, OVA like cutaway things during like the 20-minute episodes.
Yeah, I think Skateboard Nerd does. Yeah, he canonically does die in that in that scene. And oh man, there's so much to say about that, because it's like, well, okay, I want to go back and talk a little bit about the conception of this episode, if that's
sure.
okay.
Yeah. For sure.
So this episode is episode 33 in the production pipeline, which of course is very late. It's after TKO. It's way later. And the reason why we did this was because we did Face Your Fears. We had just boarded Face Your Fears. Dave and Haywan had just done Face Your Fears. And that episode is all about looking into Gar's neuroses and a little bit of why he's so afraid of Carol and all this stuff. And we realized that we hadn't done enough to build up. This kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about these character arcs. We realized we hadn't done enough yet to build up the kind of the legend of Mr.Gar, why he's such a strong, cool character that we would then show, start deconstructing him and Face Your Fears. So we realized, hey, let's go back and add another Mr.Gar episode earlier so that this builds up properly. So Dave and Haywan had already boarded Face Your Fears. And we, again, kind of with a very quick turnaround, Ian and I just had this conversation. I think it was Ian who was let's do that Batman episode, Legends of the Dark Knight, but with Mr.Gar. And then we're all, and that it all came together very, very quickly. This idea of seeing the character backstories and all examples of Mr.Gar. He's very much like the fantasy of the idea that you could have a good boss.
Yeah. What a
or even
what
really
a
just
fantasy that is.
Yeah, or even just the fantasy that positive masculinity exists.
Yeah.
And he becomes this example of something that is a testosterone driven masculine character who is also a positive character and a warm positive role model. And the show subverts that a lot, but it's also how do we show what that could look like? And also, a good boss. It's all these stories are about what if your boss was good? It's and it's a shockingly, and it feels like you're watching something oh my god, I can't believe it. When he defends Enid against a customer, it's like.
Yeah, that has never
That
once
hits.
happened to me.
I've never had a manager do that in a job.
Yeah, anytime I've ever worked retail, that has never. I just get pulled into the office and get a write up whenever.
Yeah, exactly.
I would piss off a customer, but
Let me just say.
go ahead.
It sounds like this episode was from basically it was written at the 11th hour for season 1A, and also just because again you already boarded the Face Your Fears episode, and also that the opening. This sounds like this from a production standpoint. It sounds like a very last minute episode, but it also just feels this feels so right to fill in a lot of Dulaw foreshadowing, develop Gar, and Gar's one of my favorites, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah,
for sure. And it's a lot of the times when you do things like this, it ends up being some of the most fun you have, because there are multiple layers to it too, because it's why did we give Dave and Haywan this offbeat, not particularly action heavy, comedic episode that also allows them to lift a section from an old storyboard? It's because they had just done Face Your Fears, which was a very complex, challenging episode. So we wanted to give them something a little bit lighter to work on afterward. And then similarly, with Parker and Ryan, they had just done TKO Part 2, and we gave them extended the Let's Watch the Pilot, which is another one that's a little bit less of an intense. We were trying to give them something a little bit less challenging after doing those big episodes. And so
that
it all
sounds very
came together.
nice.
Look. The animation pipeline is a painful, deeply burnout-inducing thing.
Yeah.
So whenever we can, we try to do these little things. Whenever time allows, it was all part of this meticulous building out of this first section of episodes. And it's funny. I'm going to go way back here and talk a little bit about working with the network and the promotion department on this, if you'll allow me.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Because so at the very beginning, right when we were getting ready to launch the show and we just handed in our first few episodes, Ian and I flew out to Atlanta to Cartoon Network's home base, and we got to meet everybody there, and they talked about all their plans for launching OK KO. They showed what the Comic-Con booth would look like, and we sat down with the programming department, and they showed us the now legendary schedule for the first week of OK KO, which I'm assuming you remember, but if you don't, it was a full week where it was every hour they would air an OK KO, and then every single other thing would be an episode of Teen Titans Go. And now people speak of that as though it was this legendarily terrible thing, and it's I understand why, but for us in that meeting, we were just like, okay, Teen Titans Go is the show you guys air all the time, and what you're trying to do is make people connect us with Teen Titans Go, which would maybe make you then connect it with Teen Titans Go and consider them to be sister shows to air all the time together. And so Ian and I were kind of stoked on that idea. We were like, you know what, that makes, let's do that. Obviously, that's not what ended up happening, and they ended up kind of, abandoning a lot of those plans not too long after. But anyway, part of the reason why we were able, and so we were excited by the idea, even though it was like obviously kind of insane. The show was subject to so many different experimental, release strategies that it kind of boggles the mind. But that one, when we got it, we were just like, hey, we get it. That rules. As long as we rerun the show a lot during the day, we're happy. But they were really good to us in a lot of ways, because like, this is episode 33, and we were able to air it, much earlier because we were and I'm sure you have already discussed this, but like we were told in advance, like, you're going to do 52 episodes, and half of them or more are going to sit on the shelf for months because we want to air one of them a day for like several months in a row, Yeah. And so because of that, we had this flexibility to conceive these episodes out of order and place them in the intended airing and release order for the most part. Not all of them. Plaza Olympics got held, and We Got Hacked got held for different events. But for the most part, these episodes. And what we did is, we didn't want to scare. The network was afraid of the idea of a story-driven serialized show, even then. And so we didn't say these episodes are building on arcs, and all that stuff. What we said is we were like, hey, it's like a mixtape. We used the word mixtape. We were like, these episodes are all self-contained, but they all play off each other in good ways, and we'd love to have them play in a certain order. And so we had this like a list that we brought to the network, and so that was something we had to update, because we were like, oh wait, we got to put Legends of Mr.Gar in here. So we nudged that up, and they were good about it, putting it here. So that's my whole background thing about like why it came out of order and how it was conceived and all that stuff.
It makes a lot of sense. It's also very funny that network execs are like, you had to trick them like they're animals, like get it, like you had to lead them on a certain path. Like, no, this isn't. There's no continuity here, but like these episodes, if they're next to each other, people will enjoy them more.
Well, look, it's also totally it's true, and it's also totally true, because it's like, the idea of OK KO airing at all times in a random order like Teen Titans Go, even though the show has serialized elements, it would make perfect sense. You could throw this episode at a random time,
for sure.
And I think that we always built the show in the hopes of doing that, with some exceptions, of course. Obviously certain, but even like Point Prep, like you could throw a random episode of that on,
for sure,
and it wouldn't be a big deal.
I truly think. I mean, this is a bigger conversation, but like kids are just way smarter and more perceptive than any network is willing to accept.
1,000%. 1,000%. I mean, think
because they'll, if they see something and they're like, okay, this is clearly part of a greater whole, they're not going to be like, I can't watch this, I don't know what's going on. They'll watch it and they'll be able to like fill in the blanks somehow.
I mean, how else do you account for the success of Dragon Ball Z? It's not like every kid who watched Dragon Ball Z was watching the show from the beginning. That would have been physically impossible at the time. They jumped in because their friends at school told them it was cool. They jumped in at a random episode, and they picked it up from there. And that's because all viewers, and kids in particular, are very, very smart. So anyway, oh, go ahead.
If I may, like, give an anecdote as a used to be dumb kid. Like, when Power Rangers RPM was, like, airing, like, it had an infamously terrible, like, air schedule. And, like, it was, I was still able to, like, piece together, like, as, like, a dumb 4 or 5-year-old. I forgot what age I was when that show was airing. But, like, I was still able to piece it all together, because it's like, oh, like, even if I missed episodes because it had a really bad schedule, because it's like, oh, yeah, I understand this context clue, this happened off screen, or this happened when I wasn't looking, and it's like, yeah, it's just... Like, serialized stories, like, yeah, they could be dangerous, but, like, if you give enough context clues, if you give that little, like, hint, like, people will get it, Like, totally, it's kind of the same with comic book storytelling, but that's a whole other thing.
I mean, not getting everything isn't that big of a deal as a viewer.
Yeah, but there's an obsession with, like, wanting to know everything now, and it's like, as long as you're enjoying yourself.
I think only adults care about that, though.
Yeah. And also, like, that even comes down to...
teenagers, maybe.
Yeah, and that even comes down to, like, jokes. Like, if you're a kid and you're watching The Simpsons or Mystery Science Theater, you're not really getting half of the jokes,
Yeah.
but you don't care. You're happy to be there.
Yeah.
And you'll even get why a joke works even without getting like the cultural reference or something like that.
Yeah,
You know?
when I was watching Mystery Science Theater in 2003 on burnt DVDs, there was many times where I was like, I know that this is a reference to something, and I trust them that it's funny, so I'm going to laugh at it.
Yep.
You know, like that kind of association. For me, like with the story thing, like, you know, there were a lot of times when watching like Dragon Ball Z is a big one, but then stuff like Deep Space Nine, you know.
It's funny. I'm watching that for the first time right now.
Ooh,
It's so good.
interesting.
Horeb was trying to sell me Nikki on what is it, Babylon 5?
Yeah, him
talked?
and Maddie and Owen all got obsessed with Babylon 5, and they insist it's one of the greatest TV shows of all time.
Yes.
And I believe them. Like Maddie and I are watching through Deep Space Nine now, and I can tell Maddie's like feeling like, oh, I should have watched Babylon 5 later, because like I think it became one of her favorite shows she had ever seen.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh, is she now like, this isn't as good as Babylon 5?
I think it's not so much specifically a Star Trek show as it is like all shows now are like not quite.
Oh yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. So
I mean, sometimes you do just kind of feel that, you know, when you're there have been times where I've like read a book that was so good, and then like I was watching a show and I'm like, that's not quite as good as Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin, you know? Like that. And it's like, yeah, sometimes you have that honeymoon period. Sometimes it lasts your entire life. Who knows? But
but in any case, I didn't mean to go off on that whole thing, but it's like it goes to show again, the show, especially at this time in its run, comes off as a very loosey-goosey show, and it is intentionally that way, but it goes to show just how much kind of was going on behind, and the planning and the meticulous ideas behind why we were doing these things in the way that we did them.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's awesome that like season 1 is like a sandbox of a show. You know, like there's the first 6 episodes, which are like in a rough order, you know, that kind of like tell one complete story, but then after that it becomes very like do whatever you want, kid, you know, just go ahead and play. Like maybe season 1A more so because like, oh, you gotta watch the TKO thing, but again, like sometimes you don't gotta watch. Sometimes it can just be like, because there was times when you know, I would miss airings of episodes because that's just how cartoons are. Sometimes they just are like, oh yeah, 10 episodes aired when you blinked, and they're on the app, you know, and I would like watch the most recent one not knowing that there were more before it, and then I would be able to pick up that I was like, okay, I missed some stuff, but I was able to understand the premise of this episode generally, you know.
And this is the kind of episode
really affected.
Yeah, and this is the kind of episode that like you don't need any front porching at all.
Absolutely. It is
completely clear.
It's exactly like you're just like, all right, this is just these two characters, their relationship to Gar. We get Keith David as Crinkly Wrinkly in his like which is great, you know. It's Goliath.
Oh yeah,
and gargoyles and things like that. You know,
it was really fun. You know, conceiving of the backstories of these characters, and then this is like pieces of a puzzle, right? Because it's like you later see various versions of, you see more of Enid's backstory in like Second First Date, and You Have to Care and all that stuff, and then Rad, you get to see more of his backstory, and it's like, how do these individual pieces fit together was a really, really fun thing to do. And Dave and Haywan did a really good job coming up with the way that these characters felt at these like slightly earlier versions of their lives.
Yeah, this is like the first episode where we really see Enid not, like we see like, okay, something turned her from this person into the person that she is today, and then like I think Face Your Fears, that was another one.
Yeah, because Enid's like sheepish. She's like nervous at this time because it's like she's probably still shaken from everything bad that happened to her between Elodie and Rad, in her life.
Yeah. Yeah, God.
And Gar helps her find her. Gar helps her find her kind of confidence in herself.
Good. Yeah, very good. A couple more notes that I have are one. This goes for the whole series, but it was just something that made me laugh this time around. Is the vehicles in this show are so good. They're all like the super dumb, like He-Man, very, very like, they're just these ridiculous like action toy vehicles. Obviously, it has been said before that everybody on Earth wishes that there was a toy line for this show, because it's like intentionally toyetic.
Yep.
And I've mentioned before that the only like official merch I have of it is the DVD, which I got at a family video that was closing down because of a certain
you
public
too?
health crisis. Yes. And I have the made by the Mystery Shack, which is like a third-party sort of fan website. They did a POW card for Just KO, and I have that.
Man, we really wanted there to be toys. I mean, we those vehicles and like all the Red Action, like all the Hue Troop vehicles and stuff.
God.
Like it was all like, come on, please.
Like as someone who started to get into toys with, I'm not started. I got into them in 2019. Like just give me the things. I wish there were things.
Oh yeah. That episode, Hope This Flies, was another one where it was like, we want to show off how fun these vehicles are, watching them drive around, all the cool things they can do.
Yeah. Yep. I think I'm looking at my exorbitant amount of toys that I have in front of me right now on my shelf above my computer. And, I have these Chowder toys right here. Chowder, not a very toyetic show, but it's still got figures.
And, like, look, even some of the merchandise, we've talked about this before, but, like, even some of the heavily merchandised shows, like, you can't get a conventional action figure of, Garnet from Steven Universe.
Yeah.
There are things you can get, but, like, if they had just made a proper, like, cool, articulated action figure, like, so much money left on the table there.
Yeah, like even just like something like a Figma, something like that. Like obviously, like it would be better if it was a lower price point.
But even at a higher price, people would buy it. That's the thing. They could charge $100 for a Garnet.
Yeah,
Figma.
Steven Universe has that install base.
Yeah, they could charge whatever they wanted, and people would buy it.
The only ones that, like, it's just those like little blind box figures or things like that.
And those are cool, but like it's there's still potential left on the table, and certainly with KO, a lot of potential left on the table for things we could have merchandised, and it's a weird thing to be like, oh, I wish I had the privilege of the characters we worked on filling landfills with cheap plastic, but the fact is, we live in this world. Yeah. And you have to have a fondness for garbage in order to survive.
Absolutely,
that's just a fact.
There's much landfill on my shelf here. So, very, very true. I have still in box Clerks in action figures, lining the back of my wall here. So you want to talk about landfill? There you go. Actually, I think those are like kind of hard to come by now, but I got them for super cheap. I got them like $5 at a secondhand store, because I'm sure absolutely nobody thought, oh, here's toys based on the Clerks animated show that aired 2 episodes on television.
See,
and
very smart though. They knew how to. They knew that they could make those toys, and there would be an install base to get them. Now, and that's how it works.
Exactly.
But anyway, so you were talking about Keith David. That was a lot of fun bringing him in.
Yes.
For the Crinkly story. And look, the Crinkly thing is a perfect example where it's like, hey, normally at this point of an episode, we would have a big, extravagant action sequence. But because we're trying to do something a little bit lighter, we have instead an incredibly absurd, surreal, weird sequence inside Crinkly's mind.
Yeah.
But of course, all of it's true.
Parts of truth. Yes, exactly. Like Plasmo and
you're
things like things that sound so stupid that you're like, that can't possibly
it's
be
all
true.
Like you're basically seeing the events of Lad and Logic and GarQuest, from Crinkly's point of view,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. How did you conceptualize the whole Mr.Gar jingle? Because that's one of the most memorable parts of OK KO to me. That Mr.Gar.
Oh, that comes from that comes from Ian, and he really, really wanted to do John Henry.
Yes, that's
what that is.
Yeah, based Ian,
especially with him like walking at the end, swaying his arms.
Man, it's funny. I was watching that, and it's just like some of the touches that Dave and Haywan put in, although just weird, surreal moments, they just like really crack me up. The way he eats the
Yeah.
rock and like makes the stuff, just like the way that the place forms, the way that Plasmo talks and lies down to like die and then turn into the plaza. It's like so funny.
It's a very like McDonald's toy looking thing, you know, with Plasmo, and then like this is a discussion for the end of season 2, but like Plasmo itself is like very much like Fortress Maximus or Metroplex from Transformers.
Yep.
You know, just like that like city that transforms into a robot kind of thing.
Yeah, and so again, it goes to show it's like, oh, we knew then that later we were going to have a climactic scene where the plaza turns into a giant robot.
Yeah,
and,
which I appreciate very much.
and we thought we'd seed it as this. We'd seed it first early as like the silliest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah, but you know, not to discredit, like we barely talked about the Rad flashback has like I love Rad, so it's just great to see him as like when he was slightly more humble, but like also more of like he was more like, I don't know, it was more obvious how fake his facade was back then, and then like he was humble, and then he became worse, like it said.
Yeah, it's like it's in this flashback. It's like it feels like he'd maybe very recently been poisoned by Belle Beefer and Mega Football Baby. You know, in the events of Second First Date. Like I think that probably both of these happened not too long after the events of Second First Date. You know, and so like we're seeing that he's very much trying really hard to put on this front, and it's like even worse, and it's like very lame and sad. But man, I love the way that Haywan boarded all of the moments of Rad just like spinning around in the chair during the job interview and stuff. Like it's so funny.
Very relatable.
Like, one of my absolute favorite like little moments of violence in the show is Rad confronting Shannon. Shannon is, you know, just like looking unenthused and punches him with the hammer instead of whacking him. And then he like is curled up and like his skin is sagging off. Like it's just a very funny looking pose as he's like cowering in pain after getting punched by her. I don't know, it's just like a little thing, but it just makes me laugh every single time. His whimpering, man.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I gotta go. I don't want to go all the way back to the Enid one briefly, but I remembered we didn't finish talking about Skateboard Nerd because there's something I wanted to mention about that scene, which is when Skateboard Nerd dies.
Oh yeah, I wanted to mention that.
So that moment comes from, and again, this is more of that stuff where we're trying to use every part of the buffalo or whatever. That moment comes from a abandoned Secret Mountain Fort Awesome storyboard where Ian had done a scene where he described to me the scene where a character flies away and then they stop and then they start like moving around in the sky in that way. And I was just like, that is so insane. We have to put that in the show somewhere. It has to go. And I think that the episode hadn't been. I think that wasn't in it yet. And we were working on the animatic or something, and we saw that scene, and we were like, "That's the moment. We got to put it in right now."
Yeah, and the like.
It feels like a very YouTube
Sony
poop joke.
Yeah, the like Sony Vegas like stock explosion like digital effect.
Yeah,
that is when it like the him like tweening back and forth across the sky and then blowing up that way. Yeah, it definitely made me think of like YouTube poops. It made me think of like Inferno Cop, the Trigger show, and so learning that it was like a Secret Mountain Fort Awesome thing, like that makes a lot of sense. Just because there's like like a lot of leftover DNA of that show. I've still never watched Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, but over the years I've been like, I've had this name of a video in my head, whether or not I even agree with the thesis of it. Just called "Is Secret Mountain Fort Awesome Secretly Awesome?"
I think you should do it. I think that it's a really, really interesting show to watch as this kind of forgotten DNA that like extends out to several shows. You know, and that's another show that also like it aired. Well, I don't think it was because they wanted to, but that show aired supremely out of order, and so it's like some of the episodes at the beginning were like later episodes, and some of the early episodes were at the end, and like it's like super interesting.
Yeah, I would love to sit down and watch it because it was just like one of those things that, you know, because I was getting into like really paying attention to cartoons, and who was making them around the time of like the end of Flapjack into Adventure Time, regular show, stuff like that, and that's when this came out, and that was when like people on YouTube and other forums were like, "This sucks. These shows are bad. Cartoon Network's falling off." You know, like this.
Somehow that's
and
always
Problem
happening.
Solvers. Yeah, weird. It's almost like people grow up and are no longer the target demographic for these children's shows. Strange. But, you know, the stuff like, I feel like Gumball was the only one of that, like, like, right after Adventure Time and regular show, those shows that, like, continue to exist.
Yeah, I think that because, like, you know, Adventure Time and regular show were originally I think the idea and why they were like PG shows was like, oh, we're kind of trying to create this like bridge to Adult Swim, right?
Yeah,
and then
that's what it felt like.
Yeah, and then Problem Solvers and Secret Mountain Fort Awesome took that farther, but those were shows that that I think the network, I guess, was unsatisfied with or whatever. They didn't know what to do with them and all that.
Yeah,
obviously there are shows that are, you know, they're certainly more I guess demanding to the viewer, you could say, but sure. I think both shows are pretty amazing.
Yeah,
but like,
I don't know, I've grown to such a point where that kind of presentation and comedy and everything, not necessarily that it appeals to me more, but like people got so annoyed by it or so like incensed by it, and that stuff just doesn't bother me.
Well, also it's like when you see something,
I think it ever bothered me, but it just doesn't bother me. Yeah,
and to me it's like when you see something on TV that doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before, and that's certainly the case for Problem Solvers. You know, you have to understand when you're getting mad that like you're having some weird like animalistic reaction to something that is unfamiliar to you. You know, it's just like, hey, maybe take a moment to like appreciate like, wow, I'm seeing something completely bizarre, and isn't it interesting that something like this is on television? Isn't that cool? And like I got to know people who worked on that show are friends I have friends, you know, John Pham, you know, worked on that show, and he went on to be the art director on KO, and I had a lot of friends who worked on the show, nicest people in the world. And again, Secret Mountain, like a funny thing with that was like, you know, Ian was working on that, I think, when I first met him. And the show hadn't been released yet. And I remember like, hey, can you show me an episode of Secret Mountain Fort Awesome? And I sat in his office and he showed me this episode called Just for Kicks. And I remember being like, this is the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, it is so funny. So when you do watch through Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, keep an eye for President of the Universe and Just for Kicks.
Yes. So I do, like, I don't know, it just, there's something like validating but also annoying about how recently there have been people that are like, wait a second, like posting clips of Uncle Grandpa and being like, was this show funny this whole time?
Yeah, it's like, no shit. Yeah.
And I'm just like, yes, it was.
Yeah. And well, I think that like maybe, you know, the network, you know, I think when Regular Show and Adventure Time became hits, clearly they thought that, you know, Secret Mountain and Problem Solvers were the shows that were the right fit to kind of draft off of that. And then it didn't work for them. I don't know if it was the ratings or whatever. And then they very quickly got into production with Uncle Grandpa and Steven Universe and Clarence. And I think that they realized that was kind of the direction they were going to take when they were doing shows to kind of to pair with those two hits.
It felt like a gift to me specifically that some of the first HBO Max shows were like spiritual successor to Uncle Grandpa, spiritual successor to Clarence with Take and Seek and the Fungies.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, of course, those shows didn't get treated the best, let's say that, with their, you know, what happened with them on HBO Max.
Beyond tragic.
They are originals on HBO Max, and yet you cannot watch them on that. So, but both shows are hilarious and excellent. Like Take and Seek especially was just starting to get really good, and then just died right at its prime. Like literally, like 2 months after the most recent batch of episodes aired.
I mean, look, and you know, I don't want to go too deep on this, but it's like, you know, it goes back to what you were saying about all those great Netflix cartoons, where it's like you put forth the effort and money to produce a really cool cartoon, and then what happens when you release it without any serious attempt at promotion or fanfare? It's like, you know, then you act surprised when it doesn't meet your expectations. You know, you quote unquote release the show, but you can barely find it on the front page, and then you act like, this show didn't do well enough. It's like, well, maybe if you promoted it at all, you know, hey, you know, I don't want to get, you know, not too much soapbox here.
I understand. Are you saying that maybe something similar happened to OK KO?
Well,
Let's Be Heroes?
OK KO is a bit of a different story because the show was very heavily promoted when it came out, and you know it had that initial first push, but then it wasn't the follow through. You know, it was a thing where it's
Yeah.
like we had the initial first push, and I think we did pretty well on the initial first push. But at some point, the numbers weren't reaching somebody's expectations. The funny thing is, though, you know, that's because TV has been slowly dying, and it's like you look at the numbers that weren't making expectations then, and even a year later, that was considered a hit show. You know, so it's like I don't know what to tell you. You know.
Yeah, it like I'll say that it was interesting. It was funny, depressing, interesting, whatever you want to say, that I started making and writing a video for my channel. Very first video was on OK KO. And I started it like right before season 2 ended. And I was like, man, season 2 is awesome, but nobody's really talking about it. Maybe it's because they stopped airing it weirdly and like right before the ending of a certain story arc, and then brought it back like 11 months later or whatever.
It was brutal. It was so brutal. And, and you know, they were doing this whole experimental thing where they were trying to leverage these new episodes onto the app, and it just, you know, the whole thing didn't really work. And so it's like so much of the success and failure of the show, you know, was based around this weird situation where it's like new episodes were premiering on the app and then airing later without promotion or whatever. And then another thing that happened was, I don't know if you remember this, but they were doing like a summer thing where it's like premieres were airing. I think this is the beginning of season 2. Premieres were airing several times throughout the day, which I'm always happy to see. I love it when you rerun episodes.
Yes.
But the very first time the episode would premiere, it would be at like 5 a.m. And so the Nielsen ratings for the premiere of this episode would be like whatever they were getting at 5 a.m. And so of course you're going to get super confusing numbers when you look at that. And so, you know, the show, that's the word I keep using is experimental, which is true. It's like, you know, I don't begrudge them attempting different strategies to try and make these shows work, but, you know, don't necessarily blame the show if they don't succeed, you know. And the funny thing is that, you know, at the very end of our run, we had this really weird time slot where we were airing very consistently on Sunday afternoons, which is a really bad time to premiere anything. But for whatever, you know, we did hear though that we completely blew up that Sunday afternoon time slot, and suddenly things are really getting like oh my god, people, the Sunday afternoon time slot really got turned around. It's like, interesting. You know, they're barely even promoting these, but it's like because people want to watch this show, you know. And look, I'm not here to say that we needed to, you know, whatever. It is what it is, you know. At the end, it's something I note a lot is that, you know, we got 112 episodes, which is a lot compared to what happens these days. So, you know, I can only complain so much. I mean, I can complain forever, but I should only complain so much.
Sure. Not to be like, oh, you should be thankful, you know, necessarily. Because, like, obviously, you have the right to be like, oh, we could have done more, things like that. But, like, the way that it all came together was amazing. Like, I think that the third season, you know, the way that it all came together, like, you were really able to spin something like gold out of, like, such a weird kind of bad situation of like these episodes getting cut. I really hope Craig of the Creek can do a similar thing with season 5, because I really love Craig of the Creek.
Oh yeah, I don't think we have to
devastated.
Yeah, I think Craig is gonna have some good solid story arcs and you know good things that feel satisfying. You know, from what I know, it's a thing where, you know, a lot of these shows, you know, we like to do big finales pretty often, just in case, you know. And, you know, you've heard about that from Steven. You know, every Steven finale is like a pretty climactic feeling, satisfying finale, because you never know. And Craig has already had one or two of those where it's like you see an episode, it's like, you know, if this is the finale, I'm going to be happy. And so I think that Craig has, you know, I think it's going to be great. I think there's going to be a lot of amazing things ahead.
Yeah. So, I hope. I have optimism that that'll work out. It is like, going back to that mind space of like 2019, where like, I don't know, it felt like, oh, if I make a video, maybe I can make a difference, you know. Not necessarily, that didn't become true, obviously, but like that was kind of where my head was, because it felt like such a good show that deserved more attention.
I mean, it does make a difference. You know, the thing is, it's very hard to convince a person to watch something, you know, and to because especially if the thing that you're talking about takes effort to watch. You know, if it's something that you have to, for example, go on the Cartoon Network app or find on VOD, or whatever the tactic would be, you know, finding a link somewhere online. Whatever it is, like if you have to put forth even a slight bit of extra effort, it's really, really hard to motivate someone to go do that. And so, you know, the one of the key things is like seeing a lot of movement and conversation in a fandom or online, or a direct recommendation from like a friend or a trusted, you know, writer or critic. You know, those are the things that move the needle for people.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess that's all to say.
Yeah, I guess we covered everything.
Oh yeah, but anything else you want to talk about with Legends of Mr.Gar, the specific episode?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I guess nothing really specific to the episode. I think that we did a really good. You know, I think we covered it, even if we went off on the weeds. But that's fine. That's how podcasts are. But I guess this is a burning question that's been in my head since day one, and I've never asked it from you. I guess because I never had the context of the opportunity. And I'm not even sure if you would specifically know, because, you know, Mr.Gar was a character created by Ian. But is his name a reference to the Gar meme, like the anime, like things being, like, do you remember that in, like, 2007, 2008? Like, things that were considered, like, manly or badass.
I don't know.
Gar.
See, I'm not familiar with that particular thing, so I don't know.
Yeah, because I'll say, as a Gurren Lagann fan in 2007, you know, going on forums such as, you know, various forums and 4chan and things like that was a phrase bandied about quite a bit.
Interesting.
You know, calling something, I think it was like, it came from somebody saying like, I'm gay for whatever character.
That's funny.
But they accidentally typed Gar. And then people just associated it with like, oh yeah, manliness and badass. Like that's, you know. And so like I always was like, oh, is Mr.Gar, is that a reference to that old like meme from A or something?
Yeah,
awful,
I mean, obviously, you know, Ian was on Something Awful and stuff, so so there's I think there's a possibility, but I actually have no idea. You know, obviously you can draw the line to Mike Hagar. But like as far as that thing you're talking about, I can't say. I don't know. If it was discussed, if it was discussed, I don't remember.
Yeah, but I thought I should put it out there because it's literally for 6 years now. It's
maybe one day we'll find out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an episode in the bag. So, man, thank you so much for joining us, Toby. Why don't you tell everybody listening where we can find you? Maybe like what you're up to, and then without breaking NDA or anything like that, but just, you know, what's going on with Toby.
Sure. Hi, I'm Toby. You can catch me at Toby Jones on various social media. I make cartoons for a living, and without breaking NDA, I can say that you can check out Shape Island on Apple TV. I did some episodes of that, and I worked on season 2 of Jellystone also, which will come out.
I actually didn't know
which
that.
will come out one day in the future. That was super fun to work on. I don't know when that's premiering, but I had a lot of fun working on that, and a bunch of NDA stuff that I will not talk about. But and I'm working on a live action small independent movie at the moment. So hopefully one day that'll come out.
You did okay. So there was the this is not sponsored by Valvoline, the Hey Toby Hey Owen episode that came out.
Yep.
Like not recently, but semi-recent. I think like between the time that we last talked.
Yeah.
Like that was something. So definitely.
Definitely check out Hey Toby Hey Owen. That's a very very fun and culturally important project that we put together.
Yeah, but Shape Island. Like I remember. Like seeing that, being like, that looks cool, and then you said that you were writing on it, and I was like, oh, cool. I'll check it out then, because like I barely use my Apple TV Plus subscription. I used it for Pinecone and Pony, and I used it for Fraggle Rock, so that's about it.
Based Fraggle Rock,
you know. Oh wait, and the Peanut stuff.
Oh yeah,
that's
of course.
Right. The like 4 or 5 Peanut specials that they have on there out of the, you know, decades of specials that they don't have the distribution rights to for some reason, but you know, I'll get into that rant some other day. But Buster, why don't you tell us where we can find you?
Oh, hi. I'm Buster. I do too much stuff. My main stuff is I run a YouTube channel you might be watching this podcast on, called Buster Corp, where, I don't really know what I do. I just kind of, speak into a microphone and the words... Analysis? I don't know.
Short form.
Yeah,
reviews.
very short. Like people told me I should just upload them to TikTok, so I have been. So I have a TikTok. So
Cool.
I also been making YouTube shorts because apparently that's the hip thing. But I mostly cover Tokusatsu, Kamen Rider, Sentai, Ultraman, but also just sometimes cover cartoons, manga, other things, video games. I don't know, just whatever is itching my fancy at the moment. And
yeah, I kind of want to do some shorts. Not even to game the algorithm, but just because it would be a good way to talk about because I've been reading a lot of books recently.
Yeah, just give quick reviews on books.
Obscene amount. So here's my review of this thing that I read, and give it that, because I go on Goodreads and leave, 1 sentence reviews, because I refuse to write 12 paragraphs like some people do. Like Patrick Rothfuss, who happens to fucking review every single... He's just in the comments of every single thing that I read, which is usually fantasy. He's just also doing reviews of them, and it makes me not want to read his books.
Dang.
So, I'm just petty about it. But anyway, you can find me at... my Twitter account is WazRanger, WAZP Ranger. Mostly just stream of consciousness stuff, though I will give updates to videos that I'm doing or podcasts that I'm involved in. Videos where you can find those are at YouTube. It's Only Magic. Yes, that is a reference to this show.
Woo!
I do retrospective analysis kind of things, personal retrospectives on cartoons, as well as sometimes internet shows like AVGN, sometimes weird things like Ronin Dojo Community College DX. I just do... similar to Buster, I kind of do whatever comes into my purview, but I normally focus on cartoons. And hopefully I'm still making videos, because I have, at the time of recording this, I haven't done one in a while. Yeah. But that was because I've been busy with life and everything else around me. But thank you so much for listening. This has been this week's episode of Lakewood Podcast Turbo. And join us next time as we talk about episodes 17 and 18. Know Your Mom and We've Been Captured. See you there. All right.
My guy!
Welcome home, sweetie.
Hey, hon. Could you tuck little Junior here into bed? I need to take care of something real quick.
Sure thing, hun. I'll meet you upstairs.
Night-night, Papa.
Thank you.